After 30 years of searching, Sarah finally locates her long-lost sister. But the reunion is not the joyful homecoming she imagined. Emily is a stranger, secretive and distant, hiding a dark secret that could destroy everything. As Sarah discovers the truth, she is forced to confront a painful past and an uncertain future. Will the sisters be able to bridge the gap of time and trauma, or will the revelation tear them apart forever? Don't blink, or you might miss the twist that changes everything. Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Sarah Thompson's hands trembled as she held the crisp white envelope, her heart pounding in her chest. The return address bore the name of Johnson & Associates, private investigators, the firm she had hired months ago in a last-ditch effort to find her long-lost sister Emily. Taking a deep breath, she slid her finger under the flap and carefully opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, widening with each word. There it was, in black and white, Emily's current address. After 30 years of separation, Sarah finally had a concrete lead on her sister's whereabouts. As she sank into her worn leather armchair, memories flooded back. Sarah closed her eyes, transported to a summer day in 1985. She and Emily, then 10 and 8 years old, were running through sprinklers in their backyard, their laughter echoing in the warm air. The scent of their mother's lemon meringue pie wafted from the kitchen window, mingling with the freshly cut grass. It was one of the last happy memories Sarah had of her sister, before their parents' bitter divorce tore the family apart. Emily had gone with their father, while Sarah stayed with their mother. Despite promises to keep in touch, life and circumstances had driven them apart. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, returning to the present. She glanced around her modest living room, filled with framed photos of her life, her wedding day, vacations with her husband David, and gatherings with friends. But there was a conspicuous absence of her sister in these snapshots of her life. The hole left by Emily's absence had never truly healed, always lingering in the background of Sarah's happiest moments. She had tried to find Emily over the years, but with no success. Their father had passed away a decade ago, taking any knowledge of Emily's whereabouts with him to the grave. With renewed determination, Sarah stood up and walked to her desk. She booted up her old desktop computer, the familiar whir and hum filling the quiet room. As she waited for it to start, she caught her reflection in the darkened screen. Gray streaks in her once auburn hair, laugh lines around her eyes. She wondered how Emily looked now, whether time had marked her in similar ways. Sarah opened her browser and typed in the address from the letter. It was a small town in Oregon, nearly 1,000 miles away. Her mind raced with possibilities and questions. What kind of life had Emily built for herself? Was she happy? Would she even want to see Sarah after all this time? Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for just a moment before she began searching for flights. She knew she had to go, to see Emily face to face. The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. What if Emily rejected her? What if the sister she remembered no longer existed? But Sarah pushed these doubts aside. She had spent too many years wondering, too many sleepless nights imagining this moment. Now that she had the chance, she couldn't let fear hold her back. With a deep breath, she clicked Book Now on a flight leaving in 3 days. It was time to bridge the gap that 3 decades had created and finally reunite with her sister. "Are you sure about this, honey?" David's concerned voice cut through Sarah's whirlwind of thoughts as she frantically packed her suitcase. She paused, a folded sweater in her hands, and turned to face her husband of 20 years. His kind eyes, framed by salt and pepper hair, watched her with a mixture of worry and support. Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly as she considered his question. Was she sure? No, not entirely. But she knew she had to try. "I have to do this, David," she replied, her voice soft but determined. "I've waited so long for this chance. I need to see her, to try and make things right." David nodded, understanding etched on his face. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, enveloping her in a comforting embrace. Sarah leaned into him, drawing strength from his unwavering support. They stood like that for a moment, the ticking of the bedside clock the only sound in their cozy bedroom. As they parted, Sarah resumed her packing with renewed focus. She carefully selected items that held sentimental value: a photo album of their childhood, a small stuffed bear that Emily had given her on her 10th birthday, and a letter she had written years ago but never sent. Each object was a tangible link to their shared past, a potential bridge to reconnect with her sister. David sat on the edge of the bed, offering suggestions and moral support as Sarah meticulously organized her suitcase. While her hands were busy with the task of packing, Sarah's mind raced with a tumult of emotions. Excitement bubbled up at the prospect of seeing Emily again, of possibly rekindling their sisterly bond. But fear also crept in, whispering doubts and worst-case scenarios. What if Emily slammed the door in her face? What if she had a family of her own now, and saw Sarah as an unwelcome intrusion from the past? Sarah tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the hope that had sustained her through years of searching. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bedroom, Sarah zipped up her suitcase with a sense of finality. She turned to David, who had been a pillar of strength throughout this emotional roller coaster. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For understanding, for supporting me in this." David stood and took her hands in his thumbs gently caressing her palms. "You've carried this weight for so long," he said softly. "It's time to find some answers, some peace. Whatever happens, I'm here for you." Sarah nodded, grateful for his unwavering support as she prepared to embark on this life-changing journey. The hum of the airplane engines filled Sarah's ears as she gazed out the small oval window. Below, the landscape gradually transformed from the familiar urban sprawl of her hometown to vast stretches of farmland, then to the rugged terrain of the Rocky Mountains. Each mile that passed beneath the plane's wings brought her closer to Emily, and to a reunion 30 years in the making. Sarah's stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, mirroring the turbulence that occasionally shook the aircraft. She clutched her handbag, which contained the precious letter from the private investigator. The paper had become worn at the creases from the countless times Sarah had unfolded and reread it during the past few days. Now, as the plane carried her westward, the reality of what she was doing began to sink in. This wasn't just a daydream or a what-if scenario anymore. In a matter of hours, she would be standing face to face with the sister she had lost so long ago. Sarah's mind wandered to the last time she had seen Emily. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and their father had come to pick Emily up. 10-year-old Sarah had watched from the living room window as 8-year-old Emily, clutching a small suitcase, climbed into their father's car. Emily had turned back, her small face pressed against the car window, eyes wide and brimming with tears. Sarah had pressed her hand against the cool glass of the living room window, a silent goodbye that had turned into 3 decades of separation. As the flight attendant passed by offering drinks, Sarah declined with a polite smile. Her throat felt too tight with emotion to swallow anything. Instead, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she had digitized for the trip. There was Emily on her 6th birthday, gap-toothed grin beaming at the camera as she hugged a new doll. Another showed the two of them at the beach, sandy and sunburned but deliriously happy. Sarah's vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, not wanting to draw attention from her fellow passengers. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Portland International Airport. Sarah's heart rate quickened as she fastened her seatbelt and prepared for landing. In less than an hour, she would be renting a car and driving to the small Oregon town where Emily now lived. As the plane dipped below the clouds, revealing the lush green landscape dotted with rivers and lakes, Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm coming, Emily," she whispered to herself, a mix of determination and hope in her voice. "I just hope you're ready to see me." Sarah's rental car crawled down Maple Street, her eyes darting from house numbers to the scrap of paper in her hand. Her heart leaped as she spotted it, 1422, a modest 2-story home with blue shutters and a well-tended garden. She pulled into the driveway, her hands shaking as she turned off the ignition. For a moment, she sat motionless, staring at the front door. This was it. After all the years of searching, all the dead ends and disappointments, Emily was just a few steps away. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the car. The afternoon sun warmed her face as she walked up the path, her footsteps seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet suburban street. She reached the door, her finger hovering over the doorbell. A part of her wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of not knowing. But she had come too far to give up now. With a surge of courage, she pressed the button. The muffled chime echoed inside the house, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. The door swung open, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, standing before her, was Emily, but not the Emily she remembered. This woman was taller, with streaks of gray in her once blonde hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. For a moment, they stared at each other in stunned silence. Sarah searched her sister's face, looking for traces of the little girl she once knew. Emily's eyes widened with recognition, a mix of emotions flashing across her features: surprise, confusion, and something Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Sarah?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with disbelief. Sarah nodded, unable to find her voice. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now, face to face with her long-lost sister, words failed her. Emily's hand gripped the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. She looked as if she had seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 decades of unspoken words and shared history. Finally, Sarah managed to speak. "Hi, Emily," she said, her voice trembling. I've been looking for you for so long." Emily's expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions brewing behind her eyes. After what felt like an eternity, she stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in," she said, her tone neutral. Sarah nodded, relief and apprehension mingling in her chest as she crossed the threshold. As the door closed behind her, she realized that finding Emily had been just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, bridging the vast gulf that time and circumstance had created between them. The aroma of roasting chicken and herbs filled the air as Sarah sat stiffly at Emily's dining room table. Across from her, Emily's husband Mark carved the bird, his movements precise and practiced. Their 2 teenage children, Lily and Jason, fidgeted in their seats, stealing curious glances at their newfound aunt. The scene was so painfully normal, so at odds with the emotional turmoil Sarah felt, that it seemed almost surreal. She had imagined this reunion countless times, but never like this. Never with this palpable tension, this sense of being an intruder in her own sister's life. Emily bustled around the kitchen, her movements quick and efficient as she brought dishes to the table. Sarah watched her, trying to reconcile this capable suburban mother with the little sister she remembered. The Emily of her memories was a giggling, pigtailed girl who couldn't sleep without her favorite stuffed bear. This Emily was a stranger, poised, reserved, and frustratingly difficult to read. As Emily sat down, her eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment before flicking away, focusing on her plate. Conversation during dinner was stilted and awkward. Sarah tried to engage, asking about the children's schools and Mark's job, but her questions were met with polite but brief responses. Emily remained largely silent, speaking only to remind Jason to eat his vegetables or to offer more potatoes. The gulf between them seemed to widen with each passing moment, and Sarah felt a growing sense of despair. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Where was the joyful reunion, the tearful embraces, the hours of catching up she had imagined? As the meal progressed, Sarah began to notice the little things: the cross hanging on the wall, the conservative dress of the family, the grace said before the meal. It dawned on her that Emily's life had taken a very different path from her own. Sarah, with her social work career and liberal views, suddenly felt out of place in this traditional religious household. She thought of the bottle of wine she had left in the car, now glad she hadn't brought it in. The realization hit her hard. She didn't know this woman at all. The sister she had been searching for existed only in her memories. After dinner, as Emily cleared the plates, Sarah offered to help. They stood side by side at the sink, the running water filling the silence between them. Sarah searched for something to say, some way to break through the wall that had erected itself between them. "Your home is lovely," she finally managed, wincing inwardly at the banality of the comment. Emily nodded, her eyes fixed on the dish she was scrubbing. "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. "We've been here for 10 years now." Sarah's heart sank. 10 years. A decade in which she could have been a part of her sister's life, if only she had found her sooner. As they finished the dishes, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had arrived too late, that the sister she had been searching for had long since disappeared, replaced by this stranger who shared her blood but not her history. Later that evening, with Mark taking the children to their rooms, Sarah and Emily sat in the living room, the ticking of a grandfather clock punctuating the uncomfortable silence. Sarah's eyes roamed the room, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the well-worn Bible on the coffee table. She reached into her bag, pulling out the old photo album she had brought. "I thought, maybe we could look at this together," she said hesitantly, holding it out like a peace offering. Emily eyed it warily before slowly reaching out to take it. As Emily opened the album, Sarah watched her face carefully, hoping to see a spark of the sister she once knew. The first photo showed them as toddlers, covered in mud after a rainy day adventure in the backyard. "Do you remember that day?" Sarah asked softly. "Mom was so mad, but Dad just laughed and got the hose." Emily's fingers traced the edge of the photo, her expression unreadable. "Vaguely," she murmured, turning the page. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped these shared memories would bridge the gap between them, but Emily's detachment was palpable. They continued through the album, Sarah providing commentary for each photo, desperately trying to elicit a response from her sister. But Emily remained distant, her reactions muted. It was as if she was looking at strangers rather than her own childhood. When they reached a photo of their last Christmas together before the divorce, Emily abruptly closed the album. "It's getting late," she said, her voice strained. "Perhaps we should call it a night." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't how she had imagined their reunion at all. Reluctantly, Sarah gathered her things, sensing that she had overstayed her welcome. As she stood to leave, she noticed Emily's posture relax slightly, as if relieved. "I'm staying at the Pinewood Motel," Sarah said, hovering by the door. "I'll be here for a few more days. Maybe we could have lunch tomorrow?" Emily hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "I'll call you," she said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. As Sarah walked to her car, she felt a heaviness in her chest. She had found her sister, yes, but the Emily she knew seemed further away than ever. That night in her motel room, Sarah lay awake, replaying the evening in her mind. She thought of the little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort. Where was that Emily now? The woman she had met today was a stranger, guarded, distant, seemingly uncomfortable with Sarah's very presence. As she stared at the ceiling, Sarah wondered if coming here had been a mistake. Had she been chasing a ghost all these years? The sister she remembered, the one she had been searching for, seemed to have vanished long ago. In her place was a woman Sarah didn't know, living a life she couldn't relate to. With a heavy heart, Sarah realized that finding Emily had been the easy part. Rebuilding their relationship, if that was even possible, would be the real challenge. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thought was a quiet prayer that somewhere, beneath the years of separation and change, a spark of their sisterhood still remained. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Sarah's mood remained as overcast as the previous evening. She sat at a small table in the motel's breakfast nook, absently stirring a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her phone lay silent beside her plate of untouched toast. Emily had promised to call about lunch, but as the hours ticked by, Sarah's hope dwindled. She couldn't shake the feeling that her sister was avoiding her, perhaps regretting the invitation altogether. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She dialed Emily's number, her heart racing with each ring. When Emily answered, her voice was polite but distant. "Oh, Sarah, I was just about to call you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Sarah swallowed her disappointment and forged ahead, suggesting a small cafe she had spotted in town. After a moment's hesitation, Emily agreed, and they set a time to meet. The cafe was quaint and cozy, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of fresh-baked bread filling the air. Sarah arrived early, fidgeting nervously as she waited. When Emily walked in, Sarah's heart leaped with hope. But as they sat down, the awkwardness from the previous night settled over them like a heavy blanket. Their conversation was stilted, filled with long pauses and superficial small talk. Sarah tried to steer the discussion towards their shared past, but Emily deftly deflected, keeping the conversation firmly in the present. As their meals arrived, Sarah made one last attempt to connect. "Do you remember that summer we spent at Aunt Maggie's farm?" she asked, a wistful smile on her face. We used to chase fireflies in the evenings and… Emily cut her off abruptly. Sarah, she said, her voice tight. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but that was a long time ago. We're different people now. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at her sister, searching for any sign of the bond they once shared. But Emily's eyes were guarded, revealing nothing. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of forced politeness and painful silence. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Sarah felt the rift between them widening into an unbridgeable chasm. She watched Emily walk away, her heart heavy with the realization that sometimes the past was better left in the past. Back in her motel room, Sarah called David, her voice breaking as she recounted the disastrous lunch. Maybe I should just come home, she said, fighting back tears. David's voice was gentle but firm. Give it time, honey. You've only been there a day. Don't give up yet. As she hung up, Sarah wondered if there was anything left to fight for, or if her dream of reconnecting with Emily had been nothing more than a foolish fantasy. The following afternoon, Sarah found herself aimlessly wandering the streets of Emily's town, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had come so far, carried by years of hope and determination, only to find herself more lost than ever. As she passed a small park, a familiar voice called out, Aunt Sarah? She turned to see Emily's daughter, Lily, waving from a nearby bench. Surprised but grateful for the friendly face, Sarah made her way over. Lily's warm smile was a stark contrast to the cool reception Sarah had received from Emily. I was just reading, Lily explained, holding up a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Sarah's eyes lit up. That was one of my favorites at your age, she said, settling onto the bench. For the first time since her arrival, Sarah felt a genuine connection. They fell into an easy conversation about books, school, and Lily's dreams of becoming a writer. Sarah found herself relaxing, enjoying the unexpected kinship with her niece. As they talked, Lily's curiosity about her long-lost aunt became apparent. Mom doesn't talk much about her childhood, she said hesitantly. What was she like when you were kids? Sarah paused, carefully considering her words. She didn't want to say anything that might upset Emily, but she also yearned to share the happy memories she cherished. Your mom was incredibly creative, Sarah began, a fond smile playing on her lips. She used to make up the most amazing stories. We'd spend hours in our backyard, acting out the adventures she'd invent. Lily listened, enraptured, as Sarah shared anecdotes from their childhood. She told Lily about the time Emily had convinced the neighborhood kids that their treehouse was a spaceship, leading them on imaginary missions to distant planets. She described how Emily had always been the first to comfort a friend in need, her empathy evident even at a young age. With each story, Sarah saw a glimmer of recognition in Lily's eyes, as if she were discovering pieces of her mother she had never known existed. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah felt a bittersweet ache in her chest. Talking to Lily had given her a glimpse of the connection she had hoped to rekindle with Emily. It also reinforced how much she had missed, how many years had been lost. When Lily checked her watch and realized she needed to head home, she impulsively hugged Sarah. Thanks for telling me about Mom, she said softly. I feel like I understand her a little better now. As Sarah watched Lily walk away, she felt a tiny spark of hope reignite. Perhaps through Lily, she had found an unexpected ally in her quest to bridge the gap with Emily. The next morning, Sarah's phone rang, startling her awake. It was Emily, her voice tense. Can you come over? We need to talk. Anxiety and hope warred in Sarah's chest as she quickly dressed and drove to Emily's house. When she arrived, Emily was alone, pacing in the living room. The moment Sarah entered, Emily turned to her, her eyes blazing. Lily told me about your conversation in the park, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. How dare you fill her head with stories about the past? Sarah was taken aback by Emily's vehemence. I didn't think it would upset you, she stammered. We were just talking, Emily cut her off. You had no right, she snapped. You can't just waltz back into my life after 30 years and start. She trailed off, her hands clenched at her sides. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. Emily, please, she said softly. What's really going on here? Why are you so angry about me sharing happy memories with your daughter? For a moment, It seemed as if Emily might explode again. But then, something in her seemed to deflate. She sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. "You don't understand," she said, her voice muffled. "Those memories, they're not all happy for me." Sarah sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "After Dad took me away, things weren't good, Sarah. He wasn't the man we thought he was." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Emily," she said carefully, "what happened after you left?" Emily took a shuddering breath, then began to speak. She told Sarah about their father's descent into alcoholism, about the verbal abuse that had eventually turned physical. She spoke of years spent walking on eggshells, of dreams abandoned in the face of survival. As Emily's story unfolded, Sarah felt her heart breaking. All those years she had spent imagining Emily's life, she had never considered it might have been a nightmare. "Why didn't you reach out?" Sarah asked, her voice choked with emotion. "We could have helped you." Emily shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. "Dad made sure I believed I had no one. He told me you and Mom didn't want me anymore. By the time I realized it wasn't true, I was too ashamed, too broken." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. While she had been searching for her sister, Emily had been living a life of fear and pain. The rift between them suddenly made sense. It wasn't just time and distance that separated them, but a chasm of trauma and misunderstanding. As the full weight of Emily's confession settled over them, a heavy silence filled the room. Sarah's mind reeled, trying to process this new reality. The sister she had been searching for hadn't just changed. She had been fundamentally altered by experiences Sarah could barely comprehend. Looking at Emily now, Sarah saw not a stranger, but a survivor. With trembling hands, she reached out, gently taking Emily's hand in hers. No words seemed adequate, but in that moment of shared understanding, the first true connection since their reunion was forged. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but as they sat there, hands clasped, both sisters felt a tiny spark of hope that perhaps, together, they could begin to heal the wounds of the past. The clock on Emily's mantel ticked steadily, marking the passage of time as the two sisters sat in silence, processing the weight of Emily's revelation. Sarah's mind raced, trying to reconcile the happy memories of her childhood with the dark reality Emily had endured. She felt a deep, aching guilt for not knowing, for not somehow sensing that her little sister had been suffering all those years. Emily, for her part, seemed both relieved and exhausted, as if unburdening herself of this long-held secret had drained her of all energy. "I'm so sorry, Emily," Sarah finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. All this time I thought—" She trailed off, realizing how naive her assumptions had been. Emily gave a small, sad smile. "How could you have known? Dad was very good at keeping up appearances." She took a deep breath, seeming to steel herself before continuing. "For years I was angry at you and Mom. I thought you had abandoned me. It wasn't until I was older that I realized how manipulated I'd been." Sarah listened, her heart breaking anew with each detail Emily shared. The story unfolded like a nightmare. Their father's gradual descent into alcoholism, the isolation Emily endured, the constant fear that colored her childhood. "I tried to run away once," Emily confessed, her eyes distant with the memory. "But he found me, and after that, well, I didn't try again." Sarah reached out, gently taking her sister's hand. This time, Emily didn't pull away. The simple touch seemed to anchor them both, a physical reminder of the bond they once shared. As Emily's story continued, Sarah began to understand the woman her sister had become. The reserved demeanor, the carefully constructed life, the reluctance to revisit the past, it all made sense now. Emily had built walls to protect herself, creating a safe haven in the form of her current life. "When I met Mark," Emily said, a hint of warmth entering her voice for the first time. "It was like seeing color after a lifetime of gray. He showed me what real love and support looked like." Sarah nodded, grateful that her sister had found some peace. As the afternoon wore on, the sisters began to bridge the gap between them, one painful truth at a time. Sarah shared her own struggles, the years of searching, the guilt she carried for not fighting harder to stay in touch, the idealized version of Emily she had held onto for so long. With each confession, each shared memory re-examined through the lens of new understanding, they began to see each other not as the children they once were, nor as the strangers they had become, but as two women shaped by very different paths, now trying to find their way back to each other. The next day, David arrived at the local airport, answering Sarah's call for support. As they drove from the airport to Emily's house, Sarah filled him in on the revelations of the past few days. David listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'm glad you called me," he said, squeezing her hand. "This is a lot for anyone to handle alone." Sarah nodded gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence. She had always admired David's ability to remain calm in difficult situations, and she knew his level-headedness would be invaluable in navigating the complex emotions swirling between her and Emily. When they arrived at Emily's house, there was a moment of awkwardness as introductions were made. Emily seemed wary of this new presence, but David's gentle demeanor soon put her at ease. As they settled in the living room, David took on the role of mediator, his calm voice helping to guide the conversation when it threatened to veer into painful territory. With his encouragement, Sarah and Emily began to explore their shared history from new angles, filling in the gaps in each other's understanding. As the afternoon progressed, the atmosphere in the room gradually shifted. The tension that had characterized their earlier interactions began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious openness. Emily, emboldened by David's supportive presence, shared more details about her life after leaving, the struggles, the triumphs, the long journey to healing. Sarah listened with a mix of sorrow and admiration, marveling at her sister's resilience. In turn, Sarah opened up about her own life, the void Emily's absence had left, and her unwavering determination to find her sister. During a lull in the conversation, David suggested they take a break. As Emily went to the kitchen to make tea, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts. She reflected on the whirlwind of emotions she had experienced since arriving in this town. The initial shock and disappointment had given way to a deeper understanding, and with it, a renewed sense of connection to her sister. It wasn't the reunion she had imagined all these years, but Sarah realized that perhaps it was the reunion they needed. Honest, raw, and real. When Emily returned with the tea, the sisters shared a look of mutual understanding. There was still a long way to go, years of separation and misunderstanding to overcome. But for the first time since Sarah had arrived, there was a sense of hope in the air. As they sipped their tea, the conversation turned to the future. With David's gentle guidance, they began to discuss how they might move forward, how to build a relationship that honored both their shared past and their separate journeys. It wouldn't be easy, but as Sarah looked at her sister, really looked at her, she knew that the effort would be worth it. The next evening, Sarah, David, and Emily sat around the dining room table, the remains of dinner pushed aside. The air was thick with unspoken words and simmering emotions. They had spent the day tiptoeing around difficult subjects, but Sarah knew they couldn't avoid the hard conversations forever. Taking a deep breath, she decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Emily," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to know. Why didn't you try to find me once you were free from Dad?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. Emily's face tightened, a mix of pain and defensiveness flashing in her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "By the time I could have reached out, I was broken, Sarah. I wasn't the sister you remembered." Sarah felt a surge of frustration. "But I would have been there for you no matter what. How could you think I wouldn't want to know you, to help you?" Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Because I was ashamed," she exploded. "I was ashamed of what had happened to me, of what I'd become. I convinced myself that you were better off without me in your life." Tears welled in her eyes as years of pent-up emotion poured out. And then, as time went on, it just got harder and harder to reach out. How could I explain my silence? How could I justify disappearing from your life for so long? Sarah rose to her feet, her own emotions boiling over. "We lost so much time, Emily. Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering where you were, if you were okay? How many leads I followed? How many dead ends I hit? Her voice cracked with the weight of years of worry and longing. I never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping we'd find each other again. And now I find out you could have reached out all along. The sisters stood facing each other, both breathing heavily. Years of hurt and misunderstanding laid bare between them. David, who had been silent until now, gently intervened. Ladies, he said softly, I think you both need to take a step back and remember why you're here. You've both been carrying so much pain for so long. Isn't it time to let some of that go? His words seemed to puncture the bubble of tension. Emily sank back into her chair, her anger deflating. I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Scared that you'd reject me. Scared that I'd disappoint you. It was easier to stay away than to face the possibility that you wouldn't want me in your life. Sarah felt her own anger dissipate, replaced by a profound sadness. She moved around the table, kneeling beside her sister's chair. Oh, Emily, she said, taking her hand. I have always wanted you in my life. Always. As the emotional storm subsided, a new understanding began to dawn. They had both been operating under false assumptions, both been paralyzed by fear and guilt. But here they were, finally facing the truth together. It wasn't pretty or easy, but it was real. As they looked at each other, really saw each other perhaps for the first time since their reunion, a glimmer of their old connection sparked to life. There was still a long way to go, many conversations to be had, much healing to be done. But in that moment of raw honesty, both sisters felt a shift. The path forward wouldn't be smooth, but at least now they were on it together. In the days that followed their emotional confrontation, Sarah and Emily began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. They started small, sharing coffee in the mornings and taking short walks around Emily's neighborhood. These moments, free from the pressure of addressing their past, allowed them to rediscover each other as they were now. Two grown women with their own lives, experiences, and perspectives. During one of these walks, they found themselves at the local park where Sarah had first connected with Lily. As they sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings, Emily broke the comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what you told Lily, she said softly, about how I used to make up stories when we were kids. Sarah nodded, unsure where this was going. Emily continued, a hint of wonder in her voice. I'd forgotten about that. It's strange. For so long, I've only remembered the bad parts of my childhood. But hearing you talk about those happy moments, it's like you've given me back a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Oh, Emily, she said, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. There were so many good moments. I wish I could have protected those memories for you. Emily gave a small, sad smile. You couldn't have known, but maybe you can help me remember more of the good times? The request, tentative as it was, felt like a gift. Sarah nodded eagerly, and soon they were trading memories, laughing over shared jokes and childhood adventures. As the week progressed, they ventured further into their shared past, carefully navigating the minefield of painful memories. There were difficult moments, times when a seemingly innocent recollection would trigger a flash of pain in Emily's eyes, or when the weight of lost years would overwhelm them both. But with each conversation, each shared laugh and shed tear, the sisters felt the bonds between them strengthening. David, ever the supportive presence, encouraged them to look towards the future as well. You've both changed so much, he pointed out one evening. Maybe it's time to start creating new memories together, instead of just revisiting the old ones. His suggestion led to a flurry of activity, a cooking class where they rediscovered their shared love of baking, a local art exhibition that sparked conversations about their differing tastes, a quiet afternoon teaching Emily's children old family card games. As their time together drew to a close, Sarah and Emily sat in Emily's backyard, watching the sunset. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, a fitting metaphor for the new growth in their relationship. I'm going to miss this, Sarah said softly. Emily nodded, a touch of sadness in her eyes. Me too. I never thought I'd say this when you first showed up, but I'm glad you came, Sarah. I'm glad you didn't give up on me. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I could never give up on you, Emily. You're my sister. The words, so simple yet so profound, hung in the air between them, a promise and a healing balm, all at once. On Sarah's last full day in town, the sisters decided to take a day trip to the coast. As they drove along winding roads, windows down, and the salty sea air whipping through their hair, there was a lightness between them that hadn't existed before. They reminisced about childhood beach trips, laughing at long-forgotten mishaps and cherished memories. But there was a new openness to their conversation, too, a willingness to share the parts of their lives that had been lived apart. They arrived at a small, secluded beach just as the morning fog was lifting. As they walked along the shore, feet sinking into the cool sand, Emily opened up about her journey to healing. She spoke of years of therapy, of learning to trust again, of the day she finally felt strong enough to leave her father's influence behind for good. Sarah listened, her heart aching for her sister's pain but swelling with pride at her resilience. In turn, Sarah shared her own struggles, the guilt she'd carried for years, the fear that she'd somehow failed Emily by not finding her sooner. As the sun reached its zenith, they found a spot to sit, watching the waves crash against the shore. You know, Emily said thoughtfully, I used to dream about the ocean when things were bad. It always represented freedom to me, a vast expanse of possibilities. She turned to Sarah, her eyes shining. I never imagined I'd be sitting here with you after all this time. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. I always hoped we'd find each other again, she replied softly. I never knew how much healing we'd both need to do. They spent the afternoon exploring tidal pools, collecting seashells, and simply enjoying each other's company. As the day wore on, their conversation turned to the future. I want you to be a part of my life, Sarah, Emily said, as they watched the sun begin to dip towards the horizon. Really be a part of it, not just a voice on the phone or a card at Christmas. Sarah felt her heart swell with joy. I want that too, she replied, squeezing her sister's hand. We have so much time to make up for. On the drive back, they began to make plans. There would be visits, of course, holidays spent together, summer vacations with the kids. But they also talked about smaller things, weekly video calls, a shared online photo album to keep each other updated on their lives. Emily even tentatively suggested that they might write down their story together someday as a way of processing their shared history and celebrating their reunion. As they pulled into Emily's driveway, both sisters felt a sense of excitement for the future. A future that, for the first time in decades, they would face together. That evening, as Sarah packed her bags for her departure the next day, she felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course, at leaving Emily after their newfound closeness. But there was also a profound sense of peace and hope. The sister she had spent so long searching for wasn't exactly who she had imagined. She was more complex, more wounded, but also stronger and more resilient than Sarah had ever dreamed. As she zipped up her suitcase, Sarah realized that their reunion hadn't been an endpoint, but a new beginning. The road ahead might not always be smooth, but they would travel it together, two sisters rediscovering their bond and forging a new relationship built on understanding, forgiveness, and love. The morning of Sarah's departure dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself was reflecting the newfound clarity in the sisters' relationship. As Sarah loaded her luggage into the car, she felt a bittersweet ache in her chest. Part of her wanted to stay, to keep nurturing this fragile new connection with Emily. But she also knew that going home, continuing their lives while maintaining their bond, was an important next step in their journey. Emily and her family came out to say goodbye. There was a moment of awkwardness. How does one say farewell after such an emotional reunion? But then Emily stepped forward and enveloped Sarah in a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For not giving up, for helping me remember who I used to be. Sarah hugged her back fiercely, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you for letting me in, she replied. As they pulled apart, both sisters wiped at their eyes, laughing a little at their shared emotionality. The drive to the airport was quiet, David at the wheel while Sarah lost herself in thought. She reflected on the whirlwind of the past week, the initial disappointment and awkwardness, the painful revelations, the tentative steps towards reconciliation, and finally, the genuine connection they had managed to forge. It hadn't been the reunion she had imagined all those years, but in many ways, it had been more profound, more real than any fantasy she could have conjured. As they waited at the gate for Sarah's flight to be called, David gently asked, "How are you feeling, honey?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Grateful," she finally said. "Sad to be leaving, but so grateful. For you, for Emily's willingness to open up, for this second chance we've been given." David nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You both showed incredible strength this week," he said. "I'm proud of you, Sarah." On the plane, as the landscape below transformed from Emily's town to a patchwork of fields and forests, Sarah closed her eyes and let the events of the past week wash over her. She thought about the little girl Emily had been, the woman she had become, and the sister she was getting to know now. The journey had been difficult, filled with painful truths and challenging conversations, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. As the plane soared through the clouds, Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the photo gallery. She smiled at the new additions. Pictures of her and Emily at the beach, selfies with Emily's kids, a group shot of their cooking class adventure. These images were more than just mementos. They were promises of a future together, bridges spanning the years they had lost. When Sarah finally arrived home, she felt both exhausted and invigorated. As she walked through the front door, she was struck by how different everything looked, even though nothing had physically changed. It was she who had changed, carrying with her a new understanding of family, forgiveness, and resilience. That evening, as she unpacked, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Emily, a simple text that read, "Miss you already? Call tomorrow?" Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest as she typed back, "Absolutely. Same time as our coffee chats this week?" Emily's response came quickly. "Perfect. Love you, sis." 3 small words that meant everything. As Sarah got ready for bed, she noticed the old photo album still sitting in her suitcase. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the worn cover. Opening it, she flipped through the pages, seeing the images with new eyes. The memories were the same, but the context had shifted. Each photo now told a story of not just what was, but what could be again. A shared history that could form the foundation for a new chapter in their lives. Sarah fell asleep that night with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The search for her sister was over, but a new journey had just begun. It wouldn't always be easy. They had years of separation to overcome, wounds that were still healing, but Sarah was committed to nurturing this rekindled relationship. She and Emily had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. The autumn leaves crunched under Sarah's feet as she walked up the path to Emily's house, a weekend bag slung over her shoulder. The past 6 months had seen a flurry of texts, phone calls, and video chats between the sisters, each interaction strengthening their newfound bond. This weekend marked their first in-person reunion since Sarah's initial visit, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. As she reached the front door, it swung open to reveal Emily, a warm smile on her face. "You made it!" she exclaimed, pulling Sarah into a hug. The embrace felt natural now, a far cry from the awkward tension of their first reunion. As they parted, Sarah noticed subtle changes in her sister. Emily seemed more relaxed, her smile reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't before. Inside, the house was alive with the sounds and smells of a family dinner in preparation. Lily and Jason greeted Sarah enthusiastically, peppering her with questions about her trip and updates on their lives. As they all pitched in to help with dinner, Sarah marveled at how comfortable it felt, how seamlessly she had been integrated into this family unit that had once seemed so foreign to her. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of cutlery. Emily's husband Mark, once a quiet presence, now engaged actively, sharing anecdotes and inside jokes that made Sarah feel truly part of the family. As she looked around the table, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was what she had been searching for all those years. Not just her sister, but a sense of belonging, of family expanded and enriched by time and experience. Later that evening, as the kids cleared the table, Emily pulled Sarah aside, I have something to show you, she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. She led Sarah to her small home office and pulled out a leather-bound journal. I've been writing, Emily explained, her fingers tracing the cover. About us, about everything that happened. I thought, maybe we could work on it together, turn it into that book we talked about. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she took the journal, overwhelmed by the trust Emily was placing in her. I'd be honored, she said softly. As they sat together, leafing through Emily's careful handwriting, Sarah realized that this was more than just a book project. It was a testament to their journey, a way of reclaiming their narrative and healing old wounds. The weekend passed in a blur of shared activities, deep conversations, and simple moments of togetherness. By the time Sunday afternoon rolled around, Sarah felt as if she had always been a part of this life, this family. As she prepared to leave, Emily handed her a small, wrapped package. Open it when you get home, she said with a smile. On the drive back, Sarah reflected on the changes the past 6 months had brought. The weekly video calls that had become a cherished routine. The shared online photo album that was filling up with snapshots of their separate but intertwined lives. The gradual easing of old tensions and the building of new traditions. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments of misunderstanding, times when old hurts resurfaced, but they were learning, growing, healing together. Back at home, Sarah unwrapped Emily's gift. Inside was a framed photo of the two of them from their beach day 6 months ago, their faces alight with laughter. Beneath the photo was an inscription, "To new beginnings and unbreakable bonds. Love, your sister always." Sarah placed the frame on her bedside table, a daily reminder of the precious second chance they had been given. As she got ready for bed, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Thank you for this weekend, for everything. I never thought I could have this again. A sister, a friend. I love you." Sarah smiled as she typed her reply. "Thank you for letting me back into your life. This is just the beginning. Love you too, sis." Sarah fell asleep that night with a heart full of joy and hope for the future. The long search was over, but a beautiful new chapter had just begun. As she drifted off, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Emily would face them together. Two sisters, once lost, now found, bound by love, understanding, and the unbreakable ties of family. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a comment with your views. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will thrill you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.